proposals. In the room today, we have Carl, our Public Affairs Officer, as well as me. My name is Jake Alexander. I'm the Minerals Operations Manager for Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, as well as some other members of our team and members of the public. Before we get started, if you would like to make a comment and you're online, we ask for you to wait until after people in the room have an opportunity to. And if you're on the Google version of online right now, please make sure you physically raise your hand so that it notifies our IT guy so that he can make it to where you can ask a question or a comment verbally. If you have a comment that you would like also considered for the Office of Administrative Rules, which is the submission, we're hoping to get this through. Is there a QR code, Carl?
Yes. I'll drop the link in the chat for those that are online. They can also do it at adminrules.utah.gov.
Right. So in the chat on the Google, there will be a QR code or a link to a form you can submit. We'll make sure those public comments, official comments, get over to the Office of Administrative Rules. And ultimately, if you also want to make a comment, you can make it directly through that website when these are posted in the next week or so, hopefully. And there's the QR code if you want to scan that and you're in the room to also add a written comment. Anything else, Carl? Okay. Yep, perfect. This is a pretty high-level summary, and I'm happy to go into elaboration on this, but it's quite a long rule, so I didn't want to just read all the way through it, but I'm open to visiting any questions you may have specifically within the rule. In general, the goal of this revision is that we haven't really wholesale revised these rules in a long time. It's been piecemeal for a while, and we wanted to reorganize and get our language revised for clarity with respect to industry standards and state agency rules. We've kind of reorganized the way that we classify mineral resource leases, and these group mostly by commodities, by the type of resource, so the type of extractive technology that will be used, whether it's a surface mineral, a subsurface mineral. And again, these are pretty much exclusively of the Great Salt Lake. Great Salt Lake has its own set of rules, R65221. However, there is some crossover, some legacy stuff that still exists in here. But we didn't make any substantial changes to that. We also update and clarify existing royalty rates and established a couple new royalty rates and rent provisions. The goal of this was to kind of modernize, again, in the whole scope. There's new mineral interest across the state, and we, in a lot of cases, didn't have a royalty rate on the books for that. Specifically for lithium in non-Great Salt Lake brines, so subsurface brines. And we also introduced a royalty rate for other industrial minerals, which was just an oversight. So if we have things outside of the things that are literally classified in the rule, as well as geothermal resources, which is a big push, Operation Gigawatt, the governor's office. We wanted to make sure that we were ready and capable to lease geothermal resources for direct power generation. And with those, we just matched federal rates. We also created tables, reorganized the royalty rates that existed currently in rule to match those new resource lease classification groups. Will you shut that door for me? Thank you. And also we clarified how rent is determined. Rent is actually tied to our division fee schedule, which is a separate thing, but ultimately rent price is set by lease fair market value. And minimum royalty as well, which is required by code 65A, which is basically in lieu of production. And we also, in the same context of that, set some guardrails around minimum royalty and in lieu of production, and we'll discuss that here in just a moment. Overall, another major refinement we made, this isn't subtly changing anything we do in policy at FFSL or for state lands that we represent elsewhere. We refined the rules for nominating and leasing of sovereign lands to establish that we are the ones who will help you lease non-sovereign state lands that aren't SITLA. It's a mouthful. Universalizes this competitive process, clarifies and restates in common language the nomination and bidding processes and how we will accept and process those. It also removes references to the State Land Board application process, which is a legacy from before 1995. That was the days when state lands and SITLA were one thing. We also established general lease provisions. Some of these already existed in our 65220, but they were almost exclusively languaged towards oil and gas. Many years ago, that was the primary thing we leased, but now with new emerging fields, new emerging resources, we wanted to make sure that we kind of modified that language to make sure we were inclusive of all potential mineral interests across the state. We also created some guardrails to prevent land blocking leases or speculative leases. The objective with that is to encourage mineral development in the state. And we established no waste and no stockpiling provisions. And these are all things that are usually cooked into our leases when we negotiate them or our royalty agreements. And we just wanted to make them very clear in rule that that's something, so when the public or somebody comes from out of state and doesn't know Utah's process, Forestry Fire and Standards process, can see and reference those rules. We also universally removed any language related to deductions. And that is also, again, in line with how we do things on a policy level, but just bringing the rules up to snuff with how we operate. Also, it's a good time to note here as well that if you have an existing lease, whether it's royalty rates, provisions, rent, your lease governs this. This is not going to be retroactive in any way. This is only for new negotiations, new nominations, new leases. And lastly, we revised our internal FFSL bonding requirements, basically to simplify it, to say that we reserve the right to bond directly, but we typically bond through another agency with our approval. Last, you can see at the bottom here, again, just what I said kind of at the beginning, we did not materially change Great Salt Lake surface brine rules, but we did change the language in R65220 subsection 3100 and 3200, which do address Great Salt Lake leases and Great Salt Lake royalty agreements. And next year, just kind of as a forward-looking thing, we do look to kind of homogenize those in the future now that R65221 has been set up in our system. So again, that's a high level. We now open up the floor in the room to any comments or questions. We will note them, and I will try to address your questions as concisely as I can. Thank you. I'm just going to pull up the rules from the website. And can you, there's the link for the notice online as well so people can see that PDF? Great. Actually, I'm just going to go to where it's linked on the website. That way, there's no chance that I use a wrong version. Anyone in the room? Joe?
How do you, it's going to be a broad question first, but how do water rights play into it? If we're talking about lithium and brine, the context I'm accustomed to is, on the lake where you really can't enter into a royalty agreement until you have a water right to match it up with.
Right.
How does water rights juxtapose to upland brines?
That's a great question. With specificity of the rule, we would defer to water rights. And once you have that kind of in place, it would not prevent you from being able to nominate or bid for those, but it would be a stipulation of obviously within that expectation to produce, and those are things that we would kind of discuss and we can work with on the lease side of it, right? And one of the rules actually says, one of the slight changes we made to a rule was that we intend to circulate a copy of the lease, an example template, for instance, for lithium and brines or for oil and gas, during the bidding process so that people are aware of that.
But a royalty agreement or an agreement wouldn't replace a water right.
No.
You would need a water right in addition.
Depending on the type of extraction it is, yes. It's common sources supply, right, is one of the things with the lake we talk about all the time. And this doesn't really address like rule of capture or anything like that. It's not trying to re-legislate that or rewrite the law on that at all. I know that with like geothermal, for instance, there's a lot of conversations about that with respect to surface rights, mineral rights. There's been talk in the legislature in the past about amending that the way that it does to get it more in line with what everybody else does in the West. And in those cases with geothermal, the geothermal rules are very explicit with you need to have the water right in place as well. So we would mostly be deferring to our partner agencies. We don't want to confound or muddy the waters. Poor analogy maybe, but.
What about
Thank you, Amos.
Sorry. Is that still, would you need a lease for brine acquired on private
Are you
property?
contemplating like if you access the brine from private land?
Yeah.
I think that's going to be things that are going to be cleared up in the brine mining amendments.
Okay.
Like they put the latest edition out. I know that's something that the legislature is still discussing.
Because there's been a question, down
Yeah.
in Moab area,
Yeah.
Green River.
Our rules don't explicitly directly address that, no. We would again point to existing code. This is just purely for how we would give you the rights to produce the state lands minerals beneath the surface.
Gotcha.
And, depending on the context of who's the surface management authority of those lands. For example, on sovereign lands, right, we typically do not allow surface occupancy because that impairs the navigability of the river, right? For instance, the Green River in Moab area. But you would still be able to access those minerals from upland, from private land, from Sitla land, from any of the other places where you want to produce. So the idea here is to make these minerals available for lease and production, but without stepping in our own way, kind of in the sense of things that we currently do in policy in our current mandates for our surface management.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Joe. All right, go, Joe.
There's a schedule of royalty rates depending on price point for Great Salt Lake
Correct.
lithium. I don't see a schedule here. Is there? That doesn't exist.
No, it does. It's based off of commodity price. So it is 2.5% to 5% based off of the market price of the mineral the LCE or equivalent, right? Your first marketable project, whether you're doing hydroxide or LCE, we kept it generic. And also to keep the open availability for new technologies, right? We didn't want to be over specific. And it scales with the market price. So it's a scaled royalty, not a variable royalty.
But capped at 5. Okay.
Great Salt Lake's a little more complicated, as you know. Okay. Carl, anybody online?
Not yet. No questions yet.
Well, we can all stand here and look at each other.
Maybe you could address one question.
Yes, please, Mike.
So Sitla has the similar scale. We've talked about this, and below 12,000 a ton for LCE, you're looking at 1% on Sitla. Sovereign Lands decided to go 2.5%. What was the rationale in going to 2.5 versus 1?
National average, Arkansas came out with theirs. That was really what led us in that direction. I think there are similarities between Uinta Basin development with reentering oil wells. These aren't virgin resources. There's not as much of an upfront cost on that end. We thought 1% was a little too low, but we wanted to make sure we stayed relative to everybody else in the state that's operating on this. And Arkansas most recently came out with their 2.5, and I don't know if you were following that, but people were pretty upset about that being the low rate. They wanted more. So we feel like this is competitive and represents what's best for the state, and also while still keeping in mind emerging technologies, emerging operators such as yourself and others. Joe.
Is Arkansas's 2.5 based on lithium chloride or lithium carbonate or finished product?
Actually going to look at Amos. Do you know? We'd have to check. I can get that to you.
Okay.
I'll follow up. Send me an email. I'm pretty sure it's lithium carbonate and hydroxide, but I haven't read it that closely.
It feels like it would be final product being kind of lowish.
Yes, I believe so. Because in our Great Salt Lake lithiums, it's specific. It's lithium carbonate, lithium hydroxide, and lithium sulfate, which, that's maybe an offline conversation about sulfate. Because that's not really something that's produced except in medical situations, but you could contemplate an area where there's a battery technology that maybe is accessible to that. And I'm just spitballing here. That's no way official statement of FFSL. That's me and you having a fun conversation. Still no one online, Carl?
So just to clarify.
Yes.
So if I understand it right, you're saying that these rules will apply to new applicants, correct?
That's correct.
The existing permits will not be affected by this.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Specifically with respect to a lot of these new emerging things, we wanted to make sure that was clear. When it comes to royalty rates, rents, there's no, the lease governs it, essentially, is what these rules say, if that makes sense. If it's contemplated in your lease, then we'll hold you to it. If it's not contemplated in the lease, correct. I think there's maybe one place where there is a little bit of crossover in that we brought things into rule that exist in leases but didn't exist in rule. So if you kind of like with respect to, I mean, one of the primary challenges we face at state lands is people holding lands and not producing them and locking them up in really, really old leases, which is not at the benefit of anybody. The producers next door who want to, us as the state who wants to produce those minerals, and also, you know, our, not trustees, but, you know, putting money back into it, right? Especially with sovereign lands. You know, I can't speak for how wildlife would want to use their mineral royalty revenue, right? Or UDOT, for example. But in those cases where we manage other people's lands, we will include them in the conversations before, well before, that we get to the point of executing a lease for their considerations. And one of the goals of that was to contemplate a situation in which maybe another division of state government would want to allow somebody to have surface occupancy because it's expedient for them to produce the minerals. And that's, you know, based fully off of them. We would just put the ball in their court. But for sovereign lands, for obvious reasons such as navigability, we don't do that. We can't change that. Joe.
Is there, this is probably outside of FFSL, but are you aware of a floor or a certain depth below which you wouldn't need a water right? Like for, you know, deep brine sub 2,000 feet?
I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that there are some depth restrictions with respect to the brine mining amendments, but I don't think they have to deal with water rights. I'd have to review that code, but I think they're mostly upon like in which zones the brine mining amendments played in effect.
But there's no floor for.
I would say ask water rights. Reach out to DWRI.
From a mineral right perspective.
I wouldn't see that surface of the earth, center of the earth to the surface. With respect to who owns the minerals, you know, geothermal again, in the current paradigm, you know, is tied to the mineral sea unless it's expressly severed. But there's again some contemplation. Yeah, Mike knows.
Okay.
Mike's an expert. Mike knows more about water rights than I do. I'm so glad that we have our friends over in DWRI who can answer those questions, as well as members of the public who are really, really well versed in it and knowledgeable. Last call for online questions, Carl?
Yeah, if anyone online has a question, just raise your hand and we'll bring you up top so that you can unmute your mic.
Okay. Nobody? Okay, well, you can still make public comments during the Office of Administrative Rule revision period. Our intent is to submit these to OAR this Friday is our deadline for the November 15th entry. And then the schedule of when comments are accepted and when the first effective dates for the rules is also found on their website. Thank you all for coming.